The showers hissed with steam, the sound of running water echoing against bare concrete walls. Recruits shuffled in after another grueling day of drills, their muscles sore, their lungs still burning from the endless runs across sand and asphalt. Laughter filled the space, raw and cocky, the kind that comes from men too tired to care who hears them. At the far corner, away from the noise, stood a woman. She was lean, shorter than most of the recruits, her dark hair pulled back tight. She said nothing, keeping her eyes down as she scrubbed the sweat and grime from the day. But her silence only made her a target. "Look at her," one recruit muttered under his breath, loud enough for the others to hear. "Bet she won't last another week." Another chuckled, shaking his head. "Hell, she doesn't even look like she belongs here. What's she gonna do, braid the enemy's hair?" The laughter grew bolder. Steam thickened the air, but the sharpness of their words cut through easily. One of the louder ones, a broad-shouldered brute named Cooper, called out across the room, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, sweetheart! You sure you're in the right place? The yoga classes are down the street." More laughter erupted, bouncing off the tile walls. A few slapped the wet benches in amusement, others smirked, watching to see if she would break, but she didn't. She didn't turn. She didn't answer. She rinsed the last of the soap from her skin, pulled a towel over her shoulders, and walked out as though their words hadn't even touched her. Her silence seemed to mock them more than any retort could. Still, they mistook it for weakness. "See?" "Nothing to say," Cooper sneered, shaking his head. "She knows she doesn't belong. What?" None of them realized was that every step she took away from their laughter brought her closer to the moment that would silence them. Forever. Because in less than 24 hours, the same recruits who mocked her in the showers would be standing stiffly at attention, sweat dripping down their brows, faces pale with disbelief. As the woman they dismissed as soft and weak walked out in full uniform, her rank insignia glinting under the sun. Not a recruit, not a tag-along, but their SEAL commander. And when her eyes swept over them, cold and commanding, the only sound in the room would be silence. The next morning came with the familiar sting of reveille at 500. Recruits scrambled out of bunks, boots half-tied, uniforms wrinkled from a restless night. The training yard was already waiting. Sand pits, pull-up bars, and endless stretches of asphalt that promised only pain. Among the chaos, she moved with quiet precision. No rushing, no fumbling, her gear was already squared away, her boots laced perfectly. She didn't need to prove she could keep up. She simply did, but her silence only made her stand out more. By mid-morning, after punishing runs under the unforgiving sun, the whispers began again. "She doesn't talk to anyone," one recruit muttered between gasps of breath. "What's she hiding?" "Nothing," Cooper barked with a smirk, jogging past them. "She's hiding the fact she doesn't belong here." "That's all?" Laughter followed, though quieter than the night before. Sweat streaked every face, and exhaustion dulled some of the arrogance. Still, the undercurrent of mockery never left. At chow time, the rumors grew louder. "She's probably some senator's niece. Or maybe a diversity case. You know how politics are. She'll crack in Hell Week. Bet on it." The woman sat alone in the mess hall, a tray of food before her. She ate quickly, mechanically, her posture straight and her eyes lowered. She ignored the whispers, ignored the stares. To anyone watching closely, it wasn't weakness. It was discipline, but most weren't watching closely, except Harris. Harris was quieter than the others, but sharper. He'd seen the way the instructor's eyes lingered on her during drills, the subtle way they took notes when she moved, the small nods they exchanged when she finished tasks with perfect form. "You notice how they watch her?" Harris said to the group one afternoon. "Babysitting," Cooper sneered, hoisting his rucksack onto his shoulder. "They're just waiting for her to fall flat so they can ship her out without paperwork." But Harris shook his head. "No, that's not babysitting. That's evaluation," Cooper laughed, brushing him off. "Evaluation, please. She's not a SEAL, she's a tourist." The others chuckled, but there was doubt in some of their eyes. Later that day, during gear drills, the truth of their attitudes became unavoidable. Recruits staggered under heavy packs across the sand, sweat pouring down their faces. Cooper, always loud, always arrogant, accidentally dropped his rucksack near her. "Hey," he said, smirking, "why don't you carry this for me?" "Looks more your speed," snickers followed. Even the instructor raised an eyebrow but said nothing, curious how she would respond. She looked up. Her eyes locked on Cooper's, sharp and unblinking, and for the briefest second, his smirk faltered. She didn't answer him, didn't so much as glance at his pack. She bent, lifted her own gear, and walked past him without a word. Her silence stung worse than any insult. By nightfall, the barracks buzzed with gossip. Cooper had turned her restraint into another joke, exaggerating the story, claiming she was too afraid to face him. The laughter returned, but not with the same edge. Doubt was creeping in, because beneath her silence was something steady, unshakable. And more than one recruit began to wonder, what if they were wrong about her? The sun blazed down on the training yard, heat radiating off the asphalt. Recruits lined up in formation, sweat dripping into their collars as the drill instructor paced back and forth like a predator sizing up prey. "Today," he barked, "we see what you're made of. Hand-to-hand combat drills. No excuses. No holding back. Out here, hesitation gets you killed. Understood?" "Yes, sir," the recruits shouted back in ragged unison. Pairs were called forward one by one to spar in the sand pit. Some bouts ended quickly with sloppy takedowns. Others dragged into clumsy wrestling matches. The crowd of recruits jeered, cheered, and mocked each other as they waited their turn. Then her name was called. She stepped forward without a word, adjusting the cuffs of her sleeves as the instructor called her opponent, Cooper. Grins spread through the line. Cooper swaggered into the pit, cracking his knuckles, his chest puffed with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "Finally," he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Time to send her back to the showers where she belongs." Snickers rippled across the watching recruits. The instructor's expression didn't change, but his eyes lingered. Curious, expectant. The whistle blew. Cooper lunged. His movements were sloppy, but fueled with brute strength. He aimed to overwhelm her with size and aggression, the way he'd always bullied weaker recruits into submission, but she didn't move like the others. With a single step to the side, she redirected his charge, catching his arm and using his momentum against him. Cooper crashed into the sand, flat on his back before he even realized what had happened. The pit fell silent. She released him instantly, standing back with calm precision, her breathing steady. Cooper scrambled up, red-faced, fury replacing arrogance. "Lucky shot," he spat, wiping sand from his mouth. The whistle blew again. He charged harder this time, swinging wildly. She slipped under his arm, pivoted, and hooked his leg. Another thud, Cooper slammed into the ground a second time, harder than before. The silence deepened. This time no one laughed. Cooper's rage boiled. He jumped to his feet, charging again, trying to tackle her outright. But she flowed around him like water, her movements economical, practiced, controlled. She caught his wrist, twisted, and in one smooth motion had him face down in the sand, his arm pinned at an angle that froze him mid-scream. The instructor blew the whistle sharply. "Enough!" She released him instantly, stepping back into position with the same calm expression she had walked in with. Cooper stayed on the ground, clutching his arm, humiliated. The recruits erupted, not with laughter this time, but with shock. Some muttered in disbelief, others exchanged uneasy glances. She dropped him like nothing," one whispered. "That wasn't luck," another admitted. But denial still clung to the air. "He went easy on her," someone said. "She just got lucky, 3 times. The instructor's eyes narrowed. He scanned the recruits and then barked, "Next!" One by one, more volunteers stepped into the pit, eager to prove she wasn't as skilled as she seemed. The second recruit lunged. She sidestepped, swept his legs, and sent him down in 5 seconds. The third came harder, fists swinging. She ducked, twisted, and used a joint lock that made him tap out before his knees hit the sand. The fourth tried brute force, but she redirected his energy and flipped him flat on his back. By the time the 5th and 6th recruits fell, the silence was deafening. Each move she made was clean, efficient, with no wasted motion. She wasn't fighting to humiliate. She was fighting with precision born of training they couldn't even comprehend. When the instructor finally raised his hand and called it, 6 Marines in training were groaning in the sand, and she stood alone, steady as stone, not a word passed her lips. Not a smirk. Not a shred of arrogance, just silence. And for the first time, the recruits who mocked her in the showers stared at her not with laughter, but with unease. The training yard was still. Dust hung in the hot air, swirling lazily in the silence left behind by the last sparring match. 6 men lay in the sand, some clutching ribs, others groaning quietly, their pride more bruised than their bodies. She stood in the center of the pit, her posture straight, expression unreadable. Not once had she smiled, gloated, or thrown a taunt back at the men who had mocked her relentlessly only hours before. She simply stood, as if she had done nothing extraordinary at all. The recruits in formation shifted uncomfortably. Murmurs rippled down the line. 6 of them. Down. No way, she's just a recruit. Who even moves like that? The drill instructor, Master Chief Hardin, finally stepped forward. His boots crunched over the sand as he came to stand beside her. His voice, when it came, carried a weight none of the recruits expected. You've all been running your mouths since day one. Mocking, doubting, laughing. His gaze swept over the line, sharp as a knife. Now you've been taught a lesson. And not by me. Silence. No one dared to speak. Hardin turned, his hand gesturing toward her. This is Lieutenant Commander Rivera, United States Navy SEAL. 10 years in Black Ops, with missions none of you will ever read about, let alone touch. The only reason she's standing here as a recruit is because she was ordered to evaluate this program. A collective gasp ran through the ranks. Some recruits blinked in disbelief, others bowed their heads, shame creeping across their faces. Cooper, still clutching his arm in the sand, looked as though the air had been ripped out of his chest. Hardin wasn't finished. He stepped closer to the line, his words now cold and cutting. You thought she was weak. You thought she didn't belong. And you exposed yourselves, not her. You showed your arrogance, your prejudice, and your ignorance. Remember this. In the field, your enemy doesn't care if you think someone looks strong or weak. The only thing that matters is skill, and she just proved hers beyond question. Rivera's eyes swept the formation once, calm and steady. For the first time since stepping into the pit, she spoke. I didn't come here to embarrass you. I didn't come here to fight you. I came here to see if you were worthy of the uniform you're trying to earn. Every time you laughed, every time you doubted, I let it go. Because in combat, your enemy won't mock you, they'll kill you. I needed to see how you handled discipline. And too many of you failed that test. Her voice was low, steady, but it cut deeper than a shout. One recruit swallowed hard, eyes darting to the ground. Another clenched his fists, shame burning red across his face. The weight of her words pressed into the yard like a storm rolling in. Hardin gave a sharp nod. Lessons over, dismissed. The recruits turned, dispersing into smaller groups, but no one dared to laugh, jeer, or even whisper. Every set of eyes avoided hers, out of guilt, fear, or maybe a dawning respect. Cooper lingered behind, glaring at her with something darker than shame. He opened his mouth as if to spit another insult, but the words caught in his throat. Her gaze met his, calm, steady, unflinching, and whatever fire he thought he had left flickered out. He turned away without a word. Rivera dusted her hands off and walked quietly back to the barracks. Her pace measured, her expression the same as it had been all day. Composed, unreadable. But behind her, the squad was no longer the same. They had walked onto the training ground mocking her, sneering at her presence, believing she was an outsider who didn't belong. They walked away realizing the truth, that she wasn't just one of them. She was above them, their commander, the very standard they were supposed to rise to, and that realization would haunt them far more than any defeat in the sand. The days following the revelation were different. The barracks, once filled with crude jokes and muttered insults, had gone quiet. Recruits who once snickered when Rivera walked past now stood a little straighter, their conversations dying the moment she entered the room. She didn't demand their silence. She didn't need to. Respect, or perhaps shame, did it for her. At first, the shift was awkward. Young Marines weren't used to swallowing their pride. A few avoided her entirely, ashamed of what they had said or done. Others tried too hard, offering unnecessary help with gear or rushing to hold a door. Rivera neither punished nor rewarded these gestures. She simply carried on, calm and steady, as though nothing had changed. But everything had. During morning runs, recruits who once mocked her pace now found themselves struggling to keep up. Rivera didn't run fast for glory. Her stride was steady, economical, the kind that ate away at miles with ease. Soon, they realized she wasn't just keeping pace, she was leading it. In combat drills, she no longer held back. She demonstrated techniques with precision, her movements efficient and surgical. Every throw, every strike, every counter revealed a mastery they could only dream of. The same recruits who once jeered now leaned forward, desperate to memorize every flick of her wrist, every shift of her weight. Even Cooper, the loudest of her critics, had changed. His pride had been shredded in the sandpit, but instead of sulking, he began to watch her carefully, his arrogance cooling into something like determination. He wasn't ready to admit respect, but he could no longer deny reality. She was better. Far better. One evening after lights out, whispers spread through the barracks. Did you hear what Hardin said about her file? They say she ran black ops in Eastern Europe. No, Africa. Counter-terror missions. Stuff we'll never even be cleared to read about. All I know is, she doesn't miss. Not once. Rumors became stories. Stories became legend. Rivera didn't feed them, didn't correct them. She let the recruits think what they would. But when they looked at her, their eyes held something new. No longer mockery. No longer doubt. Something heavier. Respect. The final test of the training cycle came on a blistering afternoon. A simulated hostage rescue. The recruits were divided into teams, tasked with breaching, clearing, and extracting. Hardin laid out the parameters, but everyone's eyes shifted to Rivera. They waited to see if she would lead, or if she would stand back as before. She did neither. When the exercise began, she moved silently within her squad, not barking orders but guiding them with hand signals, subtle gestures, and calm precision. Where chaos usually reigned, order settled. Corners were cleared with speed. Hostiles were neutralized before they even knew they'd been spotted. The hostage was extracted in record time. Hardin blew the whistle. Fastest run I've seen all year. The squad turned to look at Rivera, but she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Only when they formed up did she finally speak. You don't need me to lead you, she said, voice low but firm. You just need to listen, to each other, to your training, to the discipline drilled into you. The uniform doesn't make you strong. The title doesn't make you respected. What you do, that's what earns it. Her words sank deeper than any lecture. By graduation week, the recruits had changed. They stood taller, moved sharper, spoke with more discipline. Rivera hadn't berated them, hadn't crushed them with arrogance. She had shown them, through action, through patience, through unshakable calm, what it meant to be a SEAL. On the final day, after the ceremony, as families gathered around the new Marines, Cooper approached her. For the first time since their clash, he looked her in the eyes, not with hostility, not even shame, but something closer to gratitude. I was wrong, he said simply. Rivera studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. Don't stay wrong. It was the only forgiveness she would ever offer. But it was enough. Hardin found her later, standing alone by the flagpole, watching the recruits disperse. You did what I couldn't, he said. They'll never forget you. She gave the faintest smile, one so small it might have been imagined. They weren't supposed to remember me. They were supposed to learn the lesson, Hardin chuckled. They learned it, all right. She turned, heading toward the parking lot where no one would notice her departure. No fanfare, no spotlight. Just as quietly as she had arrived, her final words lingered in the air, a truth carved into the very foundation of their training. Respect isn't given in this corps, it's earned. And today they learned what that really means. The sun dipped low across the base, painting the sky in streaks of amber and violet. The recruits, exhausted from the day's drills, trudged back toward the barracks. But the air carried something different now. No laughter, no jeers, no muttered insults trailing behind Rivera. The silence was not born of fear, it was reverence. Rivera walked at the same steady pace, her expression calm, her eyes forward. She never sought acknowledgement. Yet behind her, whispers carried, "She's unreal." Hardin said she commanded a strike team. Did you see how she cleared that room in the hostage sim? Like she was born for it. The rumors spread like wildfire. Every detail of her past was speculation, but it no longer mattered what was true and what wasn't. What mattered was that she had stood among them, endured their mockery, and shattered their arrogance without breaking stride. 2 nights later, after lights out, the barracks were quiet save for the steady hum of ceiling fans. Most recruits lay asleep, their bodies broken from endless training. But Rivera sat awake, methodically cleaning her sidearm by the dim light of her bunk lamp. Across the room, Cooper stirred. His pride still ached worse than his bruises. He tossed on his bunk before finally rising, his shadow cutting across the room. For a moment, Rivera thought he'd head for the restroom, but instead he stopped in front of her. "You enjoy humiliating me?" he asked, voice low, bitter. Rivera didn't glance up. She ran a cloth along the barrel of her weapon, her movements precise. "You humiliated yourself." Cooper's jaw tightened. "You could have gone easy. You didn't have to put me in the dirt like that." This time she looked at him, her gaze level. "In combat, there is no easy. You think the enemy will hold back so your pride can stay intact?" Cooper flinched. Her words struck harder than any blow in the pit. He wanted to lash out, but instead his shoulders sagged. "I don't know how to earn your respect." "You don't need my respect," Rivera said quietly. "You need to earn your own. Stop hiding behind arrogance. Start listening. Start learning." For the first time, Cooper had no retort. He returned to his bunk, her words gnawing at him more deeply than his bruises ever had. Days blurred into weeks. Rivera trained alongside them, not above them, not apart from them. She carried the same weight, ran the same miles, crawled through the same mud. The recruits began to notice. When one fell behind during a run, she didn't bark. She slowed her pace until they caught up. When someone fumbled with a rifle, she adjusted their grip in silence, guiding their hands until the shot rang true. She taught without ego, demanded without cruelty. Slowly, the men who once mocked her began to mirror her discipline. Their snide jokes gave way to quiet determination. The barracks became less of a battlefield of pride and more of a brotherhood forged in sweat and pain. Even Cooper began to change. He still burned with competitiveness, but it was no longer poisoned by arrogance. During drills, he watched her closely, trying not just to imitate but to understand. And for the first time, he began to grow. It wasn't smooth. One blistering afternoon, during a grueling obstacle course, a recruit named Daniels collapsed from heat exhaustion. Panic rippled through the squad as instructors barked orders, but Rivera moved first. She knelt beside him, shielding his face from the sun with her body, calling out for medics while pouring her canteen over his neck. Her voice was calm but sharp, cutting through chaos. "He's dehydrated. Get saline. Keep his airway clear." The medics arrived, whisking Daniels away. The squad, shaken, stared at her. None of them had reacted with such clarity. None of them had carried themselves with such command. Hardin pulled her aside afterward. "You weren't supposed to step in," Rivera's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't supposed to let him die." Hardin studied her for a moment, then nodded. He knew she was right. When Daniels returned days later, weak but alive, he looked at Rivera with gratitude burning in his eyes. That gratitude spread to the others. Their respect deepened, not because she had beaten them, but because she had protected them. The culmination of training came in the form of a night mission, a full-scale mock raid on a simulated enemy compound. The recruits were divided into squads, each tasked with breaching, clearing, and extracting intelligence under strict time constraints. The air was thick with tension as Rivera's squad prepped. No one questioned her leadership now. They watched her movements, mirrored her calm, and when she gave silent hand signals, they responded like clockwork. The raid began. Darkness swallowed them, but Rivera moved like a ghost, every motion deliberate. She breached doors, neutralized hostiles, and coordinated her squad with flawless precision. Not a single wasted movement, not a single sound louder than necessary. When the final whistle blew, their squad had achieved the highest score in years, faster, cleaner, and more efficient than any before them. The recruits erupted into cheers. But Rivera didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply removed her helmet and said, "You see? Discipline and unity, that's what wins battles. Not ego, not noise." Remember that. Graduation arrived. Families filled the courtyard, their pride visible in every tear and every salute. The recruits, now transformed, stood tall in their uniforms. Rivera remained slightly apart, as she always had, watching silently. After the ceremony, Cooper approached her once more. This time, there was no bitterness in his eyes, only sincerity. "I owe you," he said. "You made me see who I was, and who I need to be." Rivera gave the faintest nod. "Then prove it." "Out there," he extended his hand. For a moment she hesitated, but then she shook it. The gesture, simple yet profound, marked the end of hostility and the beginning of something stronger. Respect. As the recruits dispersed with their families, Hardin stepped beside Rivera. "They'll tell stories about you, about what you taught them," she shook her head. "It was never about me. It was about them learning the weight of the uniform they wear," Hardin chuckled. Still, they'll remember. You can count on that. Rivera glanced once more at her recruits, the ones who had mocked her, doubted her, tried to humiliate her. Now they stood as Marines, their respect hard-earned and unshakable. She turned away, slipping into the crowd, vanishing as quietly as she had arrived. Her lesson, however, remained etched into their souls. Respect isn't given in this corps, it's earned. And they'll carry that truth with them for the rest of their lives.